Morning, everybody. We all made it through the rain. I think everything's going to start growing like crazy after this, looks like. So, what have we been studying so far in this quarter? King Solomon. Who was King Solomon? David's son. So, he wasn't David's only son, but he was David's son. And David handed over the power, whatever you want to say, to Solomon at the last minute, seemed like, because one of the other sons was going to make a run at it, and it was preempted by a moment, I guess, because it seemed like they were gathering everybody together to declare the other son the king. And so Solomon was king by God's grace. And what was God spoke directly to Solomon? What was the conversation about? Mm-hmm. Right. He wanted to lead the people, and he wanted to have the ability to do it. He was only 20 years old, which is pretty young to have a lot of understanding of how to deal with all the different situations that would happen. And what was the first situation that we see in the Bible that Solomon had to deal with? Two women. So two women had two babies. One baby was dead, the other was alive, and there was some yeah. So there was a discussion about whose baby was who. The one that had the baby had died had swapped the babies. How did Solomon make the decision on which one was the right mother? Mm-hmm. Right. And what did the mother say? Do you remember what the mother said? Right. So he figured it out. So just like he figured out that situation, he figured out a lot of the different things. People were talking about the wisdom of Solomon a lot, and from the very beginning, not just from later, but even from the very start of his reign. Okay, and when he first started, there was a purge of some of those that were supporting others. We saw that Adonijah was one that was put to death. We also saw that, let's see, who else was there? Joab. And Joab was a warrior, right? So Joab had the potential to start a insurrection or start some other problems or even start a war potentially. And so that was taken care of also. And then there was a third one, Abiathar, a priest, right? And he had just made a bad decision to side with, not side with Solomon. So they had the purge, and then following the purge and all that, Solomon decided it'd be a good time to get married, right? And so, who did he marry? His Pharaoh's daughter. He married Pharaoh's daughter, the king of Egypt, and brought her into the city of David until he had made an end of building his own house and the house of the Lord and the wall of Jerusalem round about. So that's chapter 3 of 1 Kings, the very beginning of that. Okay, and at the beginning, what about the temple? What about David and the temple? What do we remember about that? Yeah. hmm So David wanted to build a house for the Lord. The Lord said, "No, you're a man of war. You're not going to build the house." But David did what David was allowed to do. David made the plans. David got the materials together. He made the agreements with some of the other nations for the materials. And it's kind of like when you go to Target and you buy that kit furniture, comes in a box. Everything's in the box. Well, it's supposed to be. So there's 50 parts in there, and maybe a couple extra or a couple too few, and instructions that are all laid out on how to do it. And so I'm oversimplifying, obviously, but David set Solomon up for success. The logistics of getting all of the material and all of the plans and all the artisans too. Remember, there were a lot of artisans as well. Getting all that together takes a lot of coordination, a lot of communication, a lot of time. If you go to some other country and say, "Hey, I want to do all this, I want to build this temple," is everybody just going to drop everything in the first 5 minutes and go do that? You say, we're right in the middle of this other project. And so the Lord was in it. And so when Solomon began, he reaffirmed the partnerships, especially with King Hiram of Tyre. And that's where they had the trees that they were able to get the lumber and everything for the temple. And it wasn't just, I guess you could say the wood is for the structure, but it was wrapped in gold or some other things, as we have read about. How long did it take to build the temple? 7 years. That's a long time. 7 years. And so if you already had it planned out, you already had it figured out, you already had all the artisans in place ready to do it, that's a lot of the effort in building something. You started building, it took you 7 years, and you were rotating people. Jewish people were conscripted to work on it. Thousands at a time were in a rotation, so they would always have workers. So they worked on it the whole entire time. There wasn't, let's take off a month or two or anything like that. They just worked. They worked and did it. And for the things that they needed artisans for, they got artisans. And they went through the whole process of putting it together. And let's see. And Solomon reigned over all kingdoms from the river unto the land of the Philistines and unto the border of Egypt. They brought presents and served Solomon all the days of his life. So that's 1 Kings 4:21. And he had rain. He had rain everywhere. And it says here in verse 26, Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. And of course, if you have all that, you got to feed them, right? So it's not just having all of those resources. You have to have the food. They all have to live somewhere. They all have to be taken care of. And so they took care of all that. hmm Yeah. And you ever see projects where there's rework? You ever see that happen? Brother? Well, yeah, could be, but I mean, like Brother Homer, you have rework on production line sometimes. Yeah, yeah. We call it where we are traveled work. So that means when something is there where the workman is ready to do something and they have the tools and they have the parts. Something's not ready. So something was supposed to go in before they got to it. It's not there. And so they said, well, we can't really do it, so that's just going to go happen later. So that's going downstream. And so, so where I work, we had 737 airplanes that were not finished because they had traveled work. Things weren't done, things weren't finished. They were piling up, and they called it the shadow factory because it was literally enough workers to have in the factory, only they were working on fixing brand new airplanes that weren't finished yet and had lots of problems. And so you don't see anything about that here. You don't see, oh, well, they built it wrong, they tore it down, they rebuilt it again. You don't see that. You had people that were knowledgeable about what they were supposed to be doing. They got the things finished. As far as the temple goes, the size of that, at least one place that I saw, so it was 100 feet long, 35 feet wide, 52 feet high was the size of it. And there's lots of information about all the things that were in it. What do we know about the Holy of Holies part of the temple? What was in there? The Ark of the Covenant, right? And what about the Ark of the Covenant? Where did that come from? So this is connecting all of what they're doing here to back where Moses led Israel out of Egypt. And so inside the ark, at least at one time, there's 3 things in there. Do you remember what the 3 things were? Bowl of manna. So where did manna? What is that? So we went in the desert. There's not much to eat in the desert. We have places in the United States with desert. There's New Mexico. There's other places. I haven't been to desert places in the U.S., but there are places like that. And there's nothing there to eat. And so that's where Egypt, or where the Hebrews went after they left Egypt. There was nothing there to eat. And so they complained. The Lord provided manna. And so when they woke up in the morning, it was right there on the ground. They did, but it was like bread, right? That's what it was. And so they grabbed little pieces of it, and they were able to make bread out of it. The Lord told them not to store it up for more than one day, and when they did, it was moldy, and they couldn't use it. And so they gathered it up every day except the Sabbath day, and on the Sabbath day they didn't have to because what they stored up was okay. And so they said, hey, this is a lot of bread. We like other things besides bread. And so what happened after that? Right. The Lord delivered quail for them. So they had quail to eat, which is meat. And how many people are we talking about feeding with all of this stuff we're talking about? 2 million people. Can you imagine? Look how much food we have for what we have. When we have a Sunday, or even when we have like a mission rally here or something. We can go through a lot of food, right? Or thinking about camp, other things like that too. We go through a lot of food. 2 million people's worth of manna. 2 million people's worth of quail. Did you eat one quail? You think? I don't know. Do you eat the feet too, or do you just eat the other part of it? I don't know. There are different parts of the world. They eat the feet and other stuff too. Heads, all that stuff. So if you just ate the stuff you liked, you might want more than one. And so if you think about that, 2 million people eating quail, that's a lot of quail. And so the Lord took care of them. So that's the manna. And then the other thing that was in there was Aaron's rod. And what was Aaron's rod? Where did that come from? So it was used to, yeah, exactly, exactly. And the manna that described, that was part of God's power. Aaron's staff was part of God's power. And of course, the Ten Commandments, that was also uh, provided to Moses on how we should live. Uh, and how do we know if it's sin or not? Well, the Bible tells us it's sin, but the Ten Commandments are pretty plain about what sin was. That was in the Ark of the Covenant. So that goes all the way back to Moses' time. So here it is. They're putting it into the temple, into the Holy of Holies. Once they had put it there, we studied that it wasn't just that they said, okay, hey, we're finished. This temple's all done. We're just going to go about our business, do the next project. Is that what happened, or did they do something right afterwards? They did. Mm-hmm. So first, to have a celebration, you have to have people. So were there people around already for some other reason? It was a feast. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they were already there, and when those happened, the leaders of the family were supposed to go to Jerusalem and be there in person for these celebrations. Sometimes they took their family. I think a lot of time they took their family. Uh, so there's a lot of people there already, and they extended that celebration to a dedication of the temple. And so, what else did they do that you can remember from even, I think it was even just last week? Well, all right. So, one thing that they did is they did sacrifices, right? So they did sacrifices pretty much uh, continuously for a good length of time, and it was thousands upon thousands of sacrifices that were made uh, that were done over the 8-day feast. They went over and above what the Lord commanded, and those offerings that they made, and the two prayers that Solomon gave uh, to the Lord were focusing on the Lord, not on Solomon. So the whole thing was focused on the Lord, and at the end, everybody was happy and got along with each other. Does that happen every time you have like a family reunion? You get everybody together in one place, everything getting ready to celebrate, and everything's going great, and then at the end, everybody's happy and everything's going well. I mean, it does happen some of the time, but sometimes not. But in this case, the whole country was in harmony. The whole country was celebrating, and the whole country was happy and following the Lord. So, uh, what happens when every single thing is going right? Something goes wrong. Exactly. It always happens like that, it seems. Everything can be fine, everything can be going exactly as you planned, and then seemingly out of the blue, something goes wrong. We talk about it a lot too. We have a really great service, we have really great fellowship, whatever, and I don't know, on the way home, somebody tries to run you in the ditch or something. It's like we're 5 minutes from church, and seems like the devil's already trying to get into it. And I think the more that we try to follow the Lord, the more we try to obey the Lord and follow His will, uh, the devil doesn't just sit there and do nothing. Uh, the devil says, well, okay, let's figure out how we're going to challenge this, put up obstacles and barriers and challenges and whatever. And so all of that is intended to get you off the track. And so we're going to see today how that situation happens to Solomon. And we're going to see actually what happened that caused it to happen. So in today's lesson, we're going to study 1 Kings 10, chapter 10, verses through chapter 11, which is a decent amount, but I think we're going to have to read quite a bit of it to really get what we need to get today. So would somebody like to read chapter 10 all the way, verse 1 through verse 13? Thank you, Sister Darla. So here we have Queen of Sheba who heard about Solomon, and she came not just with gifts, but she came to challenge him, which says with hard questions. So if somebody was going to give me a lot of hard questions, maybe what I do is get my phone and say, go ahead, ask me the question, and hope there's internet service and no interruptions when they're asking me the question, and I might be able to get an answer. It may not be the right answer, and it may not be exactly correct answer, but today, because the information is all available, you can get answers to questions. If you think about why we have treaties and why we have agreements with other countries, some of those are to have peace. Some of those we trade, right? We have something they want. They have something we want. We know how to plant corn and wheat, whatever. We show people how to do that in countries that have difficulty growing food. Maybe they provide something back to us, whatever it is, oil or whatever. But there's agreements that are made back and forth, and you have to be pretty wise when you're making those deals, because you want to make sure that the value of what you're trading is equitable, right? You don't want to give every single thing away you have and get nothing in return for it, even peace or whatever. You want to do it in a wise way, and so in this, Solomon had no equal as far as working with pretty much anyone in any situation like this. You could almost think of him as the ultimate deal maker, as far as working with other countries and working with pretty much anybody, is he could work through some situation which would be beneficial to everybody involved. If people felt like they were being cheated the whole time, there wouldn't be much peace, right? And so he was wise in that he knew what somebody was looking for, and they knew what he was looking for, and so it was a mutual agreement in how they went forward. And so here's the Queen of Sheba. She heard about Solomon, and she came to Jerusalem with a very large contingent of people, camels that had spices. You don't see a lot about spices in Israel. Maybe they had some, but they didn't have nearly as much as what she was bringing. Very much gold, precious stones, and all of that. And Solomon told her all her questions. Can you imagine that? Every question that she asked, he had an answer for. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. The other thing is she took a look at all the people that were working there. In verse 6, it was a true report that I heard in mine own land of thy acts and of thy wisdom. Howbeit I believed not the words until I came. Happy are thy men, happy are these thy servants, which stand continually before thee and hear thy wisdom. The country was happy. So the king was successful in all the things he was doing. The people were happy. Do you have that in every place where the king is lavished in gold and everything else, and the rest? What about the rest of the country? Does that usually happen? That the king is happy and the rest of the country is happy? Not usually. Not usually. And so, so she went through the rest of it, and when you look at his wealth, and this goes up to verse 14 actually, which is beyond what Sister Darla was looking at. The weight of gold that came into Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. I didn't know what that is. I don't think about talents too much. But I did look it up online using Google is how I got it. And it said $2,197,000,000. So that's 1 year. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year, and that's just gold. And so if you think you got $2 billion, that's a lot. And so you can imagine that what he's helping other people do is, how do I make the most out of my natural resources? How do I get my natural resources? How do I refine my natural resources? How do I transport my natural resources? All those things. So it wasn't just that, but that was a lot of it. And it says here in verse 17, 10 and 17, and he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 pounds of gold went to 1 shield. And the king put them in the house of the forest of Lebanon. What was that for? Well, how good is a shield of gold? Is it going to help you very much? If you have a shield of gold, you think, well, I'm not going to fight with it. Yeah, it's kind of a decoration shield. It's not for a war shield. Maybe he was flouting the fact that they had peace. That's one way to see it, I guess. It talked about his throne, and I actually looked online. I wish I could have brought some pictures with me, but they talked about his throne being like this throne that was just beyond imagination. The throne itself had 6 steps, and on top of the throne was round behind, and there were stays on either side of the place of the seat, and 2 lions stood beside the stays. And 12 lions stood there on one side and on the other upon the 6 steps. There was not like made in any kingdom. And it goes on other things here too. And so, let's see. Would somebody like to read verse 21 to 29 in 1 Kings and 10? Oh, 29. So even if we were there today, if we found a way to go back in a time machine and see this ourselves, I think we still would not believe it. We wouldn't believe all the wealth, all the money, all of the riches of Solomon, and it wasn't a payment or a transaction. This was continual. So he wasn't just wealthy for a day or a moment and then, inherited from David or whatever. This was continuous accumulation of wealth. And usually what had happened in the past or even today is there's wars that happen, which sort of redistribute things around. And so the fact that he's accumulating all these things definitely was attributed to God. God provided it to him, provided for the posterity of the country. And there's really no other way Solomon could have done it. And so we see that he gave God the credit in some of the passages that we read. But then we also know from knowing history that there were problems. And if you look at the number of horses and the number of chariots, earlier in the Bible, we see where kings are admonished not to accumulate horses and chariots, right? And so Solomon ignored that and pretty much just went with it. And they talked about 1,400 chariots, 12,000 horsemen. And if you look in the studies, it shows that he had cities that were set up for all the warriors. So it was just amazing the amount of power, military power that he had. He didn't use it, but he was definitely showing it. And so this was also something that appeared to be a deterrent to any war, but God was actually in control, so he didn't need all of those things if he was following the Lord. And so now in chapter 11, this is like the roller coaster, right? You can read the roller coaster and you slowly get to the top, usually at the beginning, clickety-clackety, whatever, and you get to the very top, and the next thing you know, you're going down. And you're not going down as slow as you went up. you're going down in a moment. And this is pretty much what happened here with Solomon. So let's go ahead and read about this. Yeah. Mhm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, living with Christ is going to be so much better. They had it good with Solomon, but Solomon was human. Solomon was a sinner. And so, yeah, with the millennial reign, we're going to see what we're going to see there, I think, is just beyond our imagination. And yeah, right, right, exactly. And in all these things, God's in control. That's the other thing. And so God can do things beyond what anything we can think of, and anything that even Solomon here was putting together for sure. Who would like to read 1 Kings 11, 1 through 8? 1 through 8. Thank you, Sister Doris. So when we remember back to the conversation God had with Solomon, that conversation wasn't unconditional on Solomon being successful. It was as long as Israel follows follows the Lord, doesn't turn to idolatry, doesn't turn to sin, and so on. And so that's exactly what happened. We see that happen over and over again. And it wasn't that Solomon wasn't going to continue the reign of David and that wasn't going to continue through history, because that did, but it wasn't nearly as successful after this point because Solomon wasn't following the Lord. And so uh, what you see happen here is that King Solomon loved many strange women. So what does that mean? That doesn't mean odd behavior, right? Hmm? Right, foreign women, people that were not from Israel, people that were not Hebrews. And so he did it apparently for diplomatic reasons. He did that for the daughter of the Pharaoh of Egypt. And that's a common thing. It was a common thing in historic times for people to have marriages form treaties and other agreements to foster peace. And so this is clearly when you're marrying 700 wives and you have 300 concubines, that's probably more than anybody ever imagined would even be possible. And so it happened that he did that, certainly. And the reason you don't do it is because they will turn your heart to idolatry. And we even see that happen when they fled Egypt. So when they fled Egypt, was it just the Hebrews alone by themselves, or did they have other people go with them? They had other people go with them. And so then soon enough, wasn't even before they got out of the desert, is they were already back to idolatry. And so so that's what happened here. And if you travel and we think, oh, idolatry, that's an ancient, antique thing, doesn't happen today, it's pretty much everywhere. And so you see it here, but if you travel, certainly you'll see it. And people worshiping gods and goddesses, all those things, we think, oh, that's just biblical times. It's not biblical times. It's biblical times and now times. It's all times. And there's only one true and living God, and that's the one that we worship, and the one that here was blessing David and Solomon. But these strange women from other countries, brought their culture, their traditions with them, and part of that was idol worship. And so I wouldn't doubt that for some period of time, Solomon said, yeah, no, we're not going to do that. I don't know. I know when Darla and I have a discussion sometimes, it can be challenging, and I give in sometimes, maybe lots of times, I don't know. But I think if I had 700 wives and 300 concubines, how much discussion would you be having about this and that and the other thing, and I need this, I want that, whatever? And of course, because of their background, it wasn't what God wanted in those situations, because they were not God worshipers. And so not only did it take Solomon off the track, it also took the whole country off the track. And so so what you see here coming up in verse 9, and the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from the Lord God of Israel, which had appeared unto him twice. And he commanded him concerning this thing, that he should not go after other gods, but he kept not that which the Lord had commanded. Wherefore the Lord said unto Solomon, forasmuch as this is done of thee, and thou hast not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee, I will surely rend the kingdom from thee, and will give it to thy servant. And so when the Lord says something like that, it doesn't take too much time for all that to happen, does it? So so we think about things in our life. Solomon got up in the morning and he said, I'm going to worship the Lord. I'm going to go build the temple. That's what my father started, and I'm going to finish the job. It seems pretty obvious he was focused on doing the Lord's work during that time, especially on the kickoff of the project. Time goes by. Every day when we get up in the morning, we make a decision. We're going to follow the Lord today. We're going to do something else. And it's not even just every day. It's just all during the day. Am I going to do what the Lord wants me to do? Am I going to do something else? And the Lord forgives us, and there is a path for us to be forgiven. Jesus came and paid for our sins, but the Lord expects us to follow his commandments. We say we're a child of God. He expects us to follow that. And when we don't follow it, the Lord works with us, tries to help us. But you can get to a point like Solomon did here. It's like, okay, I'm done. Judgment's coming on you and on the country as a result of this. And we're going to see that. Spoiler alert, I guess you would say, on the rest of our quarter. There's going to be a lot of cases where there are kings that were not faithful to God. And we're going to see the results of that because it wasn't just the king that wasn't faithful, it was the country that wasn't faithful either. So there are always adversaries in every situation. Throughout the Bible, David had many, many adversaries. Solomon had some adversaries, but they were not powerful adversaries until Solomon forsook the Lord, and then those adversaries that were out there, they came up, and that's pretty much exactly what happened. And if you study the rest of what happened here, the country was torn asunder. So the Hebrews were not integrated as they were under David. They were torn into the northern and the southern kingdom, and we'll get into the divided kingdom more as we get into our studies next week. Any question about anything? Is it a good idea to have 700 wives? Right. What about 699 wives? No, still not a good idea. So one's great. That's what I'll say. All right. See you next time.